Okay, welcome back. Let's proceed. The next method I want to implement in our learning traits is a get completed lessons method. Okay, so this method is going to help us get all the completed lessons for a series. So that particular Redis key that we used to store, we're going to get that array of IDs, and then we're going to use our database to get the lessons that match those IDs and then return it to us. Okay, this might be really helpful in some cases when we want to show the user the lessons that he's already completed. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this. I think it's going to be fun. So user test, and we're going to create a new test. Test can get completed lessons for a series. Okay, so how is this test going to look? We have a user and we have a series, and the user completes some lessons in the series, and then we call our get completed lessons method. Then we assert that the lessons completed are in the return value. Okay, something like that. So we're going to run a bunch of assertions, and we're going to actually learn a lot about Laravel collections. So let's get to it. First, we need a user and we need a series. We need some lessons. So I'm going to copy this. Okay, so I'll paste that right here. We flush Redis, create a user, create a new lesson, which is automatically going to create a series. Then we actually create another lesson in that same series. Okay, and then I'm going to create a third lesson in the same series. So we have 3 lessons in the same series 1, right? Then I'm going to complete lesson 1. So complete lesson, and then user complete lesson 2, and then we've not completed lesson 3. Okay, so get completed lessons method, we're going to say completed lessons equals user get completed lesson, and we'll pass in the series. So we can get the series from any of the lessons by saying lesson series, referencing the relationship. And then we need to run a bunch of assertions. Now, remember, when you're testing, the more assertions you have, the better your test, okay? Because it's going to actually increase your test coverage, and you're going to make sure that every single point of your application works as you expect it to work, okay? So first of all, we want this to be a collection. So assert instance of, so this is a helpful method that can help us check if a return or a result is a particular instance of a particular class, okay? So we want to check if the return that we have here is an instance of Laravel's collection class. So we'll say illuminate support collection class, and we'll pass in completed lessons. Okay, so we want to make sure that whatever this method returns to us, it must be a collection. So it must be an instance of this class. The next thing we want to do is we'll say assert instance of, because we don't want a collection of series or collection of users, we want a collection of the lesson class. So we're going to assert that anything that is inside this should be an instance. Anything that is inside this collection should be an instance of the lesson class. So we'll get our completed lessons, and we'll just get any random item from the collection and assert that it's an instance of our lesson class. Okay, then we can now assert true that this collection that we received, which is completed lessons, contains lesson. Okay, and since we also completed lesson 2, we should also assert true that completed lessons contains lesson 2. Okay, and then we'll also assert false completed lessons contains lesson 3. Okay, so I know this is a whole bunch of assertions, but what we're basically doing is we have 3 lessons in that series, we completed 2, and then we called our get completed lessons method. This method returns to us a value, and we assert that that value must be an instance of Laravel's collection class, therefore a collection, and then we assert that everything in that collection must be an instance of lesson class, and then we make sure that that collection actually contains the lesson that was completed. Which one? This one. And then it also contains this one, which was also completed, and we also assert that it doesn't contain this one, which is not a completed lesson. Okay, so we're gonna come back to this point because I think this is gonna actually I think this is not the best way to test this, but I'm going to show you why in a moment. So just keep an eye for this particular point of our test. Okay, so let's run this test. So PHP unit, filter, and we'll paste in that test name. Okay, so call to undefined method get complete lessons. So we'll head over to our learning entity, and we're going to create a function which is get completed lessons. And it's expecting us to send in the series. Okay, so let's run that test. So field asserting that null is an instance of Illuminate support collection. Right now we want to get the completed lessons for a series. How do we do that? Remember, we have this key that we are using for a particular series and a particular user. So what we are doing here, we are actually getting the completed lessons in an array by using this particular statement right here. So what I'm going to do, just right here, I'm going to say public function get completed lessons for a series, and we'll get in the series right here. And what this is going to return is this statement right here. So I'll cut it out and I'll paste that in. And right here, this is going to reference the get completed lessons for a series, and we'll pass in the series. Okay, and this simply gives us the possibility of using this method wherever we want to. Okay, therefore, now that we have that method, what we can do is get completed lessons, and you'll be equal to this get completed lessons for a series, and we'll pass in the series. So now we have an array of maybe 1, 2, 3. Okay, and these 3 elements are the IDs of the lessons that have been completed for this series. So what we can do is we need a collection, right? So we'll say return collect, and we'll collect completed lessons. And now that we have a collection, it's simply going to be a collection of items with these IDs 1, 2, 4. Okay, but now we don't want a collection of the IDs. We want a collection of the lessons to whom these IDs belong to. Therefore, we're going to use our map function to loop through each and every one of these elements and transform them in some way. That's what our map function does. So we'll pass in the closure, which is going to loop through each and every one of these elements. And for each of the lessons, we have available lesson right here. So we'll say return lesson find lesson. Okay, or we can preferably call this lesson ID. So what's happening here? First, we have a collection that we just created, but this is a collection of IDs. But what we want is a collection of lessons, but we have the IDs of the lessons. So how do we transform these IDs into lessons? We use a map method, and this map method is available on Laravel collections, and this map method would help us go through each and every one of the collection items and transform them in any way we want. So for example, in this case, we are going through each and every ID element, and then we are finding the lesson that matches that ID element. Okay, so before we run that, let's just use lesson at the top, use backcast lesson. Okay, so let's run our test one more time. Okay, so field asserting that false is true. Let's check out our test and look at what is happening. We ran this assertion, meaning we returned a collection. Okay, that was successful, and we asserted that any random lesson element from that collection should be an instance of lesson class. So that was successful. And then when we reach this point where it's checking if the completed lessons contains this lesson right here, it failed. And also this one also failed apparently. So I'm gonna show you something. Right here we're gonna die dump completed lessons, and I'm gonna show you what we have. Okay, so look at this. If we die dump completed lessons, we have an items array of 2. The first is an instance of lesson, obviously, and which is ID 1, and the second is an instance of lesson also of ID 2, right? So we actually have the correct values, but then this contains method is returning to us false. Okay, so there's a simple reason for this. The contains method is checking for exact values, so we might not have exactly the same lesson like we have right here, because we got one from our database, we got one from our factory, and it might be a little bit different. So the contains method might return false. So what we're gonna do is we're not gonna run these assertions using collections. What I want to do is I'm gonna say completed lessons IDs is going to be equal to completed lessons. I'll pluck out the IDs, so we can use this pluck method to get only the IDs of these items in the collection, and we can call the all method to transform the collection into an array. So now that I have an array of the completed lessons, which I'm getting from these completed lessons that I got from this method, then I can change my assertion. So assert true, and I'm gonna call in array, and the array we are using is completed lessons IDs, and I'm gonna say check for lesson 1. So lesson 1 ID, and then I'm gonna run exactly the same assertion for this lesson. So we're gonna check for lesson 2. So assert that the ID of lesson 2 is in this completed lessons IDs array, and then assert false in array for lesson 3. Okay, because we didn't complete lesson 3, we completed lesson 1 and 2, therefore this should be returning false to us. Okay, so let's run that again. Okay, yeah, in array expects parameter 2 to be an array integer given blah. Okay, I'm sorry about that. So we should be passing this as the second parameter and not the other way around. So I'm just gonna change that behind the scenes. Okay, so I'm done switching the positions. So in array method takes in needle and haystack like that. Okay, run that test one more time, and great, we have a successful test finally. So what's happening? I'm just gonna go through this method step by step so we understand what was going on. So we want to test that we can get the completed lessons for a series. So we created a user, we created 3 lessons, and these 3 lessons belong to series with ID 1. Then we completed lesson 1 and we completed lesson 2. But we did not complete lesson 3. So the completed lessons method, we got a collection of all the lessons for that series that we have completed. So we called user get completed lessons, and then we passed in the series, and we got a collection of all the lessons completed in that series. So the assertions we ran were checking if the return value was actually a collection, which it was, and then we also checked if every member of that collection is a lesson, which it was, and then we got the IDs from the completed lessons collection. And we did this because our contains method was not really comparing like we wanted it to, and this was a simple but easy workaround for us, which we might come back to later, but not now. Then we checked if the IDs of the completed lessons were actually in the completed lessons IDs array. Okay, so if we check out our completed lesson method, what it does is it gets the completed lessons for a series, which returns to us an array right here, and then we change that array to a collection. We map through each and every one of those array elements, we get the lesson with that ID, and we return it as a collection. Okay, so if you haven't understood it, just go through again. It's not that difficult, but thank you so much for watching. Let's continue having some fun in the next episode.